The first thing I saw when I opened the side door of St. Andrew's Chapel was my own photograph beside a white urn. It was the picture Owen had taken on our last trip to the Oregon coast, before I learned he had been stealing from me. I was laughing into the wind, my hair in my mouth, one hand raised to keep my hat from blowing away. Someone had enlarged it until my face filled the gold frame. Under it, a ribbon read, beloved daughter, sister, and friend. For a second, I thought I had walked into the wrong service. Then I saw my mother in the first row, folded over as if grief had broken her spine. Malcolm stood beside her with one hand on her shoulder. Phoebe was near the altar in a black dress I had never seen, staring at the urn like it might answer a question. Owen was speaking softly to the minister. My funeral had started 11 minutes earlier. I had been missing for 3 days because someone had run my SUV off a wet county road, and my family had already decided I was dead. That was terrible enough. What made my legs go cold was the manila folder on the small table beside the urn, stamped with the logo of a law firm I had never hired. And what made me stop breathing was hearing Owen tell the minister, "Sloane was very clear about wanting her family protected. We have her final instructions." He did not know I was standing behind him. Welcome back to Wounds and Wonder. I'm Sloane Whitaker, I'm 38, and by the time that service ended, I understood that the accident meant to erase me had begun months before the rain ever touched that road. If stories like this keep you hooked, please like the video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, are you listening somewhere quiet, or is the rest of the world carrying on around you? I ask because, that morning, the whole chapel sounded impossibly loud to me. The side door clicked shut behind me. Phoebe turned first. Her mouth opened. The program fell out of her hand. Sloane. Every face in the chapel swung toward me. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her, high and raw, and then she was running down the aisle. She hit my shoulder hard enough to make the bruises from the crash flare. I held her because that is what daughters do when their mothers are shaking, even when the daughter has no idea why her mother is shaking. They told us the car was in the river, she sobbed into my coat. They told us they couldn't find you. They found the car, I managed. Not me, I climbed out before it went in. Malcolm reached us next. He looked relieved, but not in the loose, helpless way I expected. His eyes went immediately past me, toward the doorway, as if calculating who else might be there. Owen did not move at all. That was the first detail I could not forgive myself for missing. A man who believed the woman he loved had just returned from the dead should have looked stunned. Owen looked interrupted. Then his expression rearranged itself into concern. He crossed the aisle and touched my elbow. "Thank God," he murmured. "Sloane, where have you been?" I pulled my arm away. "At Mercy General. A woman named June Prout found me in a ditch and drove me there. My phone was dead. The deputies said they were notifying next of kin. Apparently they notified you all before anyone bothered to ask the hospital whether I had a name." Camille would later tell me that confusion after an accident was common. The sheriff's office had issued a missing person alert, not a death certificate. The funeral home had never received a body. There had been no legal declaration of death. My family had chosen a memorial service because the news report described an empty vehicle pulled from the Greystone River. That explained their panic. It did not explain the folder. I pointed at it. "What are my final instructions?" Owen glanced at Malcolm. It was brief, but it happened. "Your mother wanted the service to feel complete," Owen answered. "We asked Preston Vale's office to prepare some temporary documents in case there were business issues while you were missing." "Preston Vale is not my lawyer." "No," Malcolm cut in too quickly. "But Camille was out of town and we needed advice." I stared at the folder. The firm name, Vale, Mercer and Dunn, had been on the paperwork for a development Malcolm had tried to sell me on last year, a luxury apartment project outside Columbus. He had asked for $2 million, calling it a family opportunity. I had said no after Gideon showed me the projections. The land was overpriced, the permits were delayed, and the lender had a reputation for squeezing borrowers. Malcolm had not spoken to me for 2 weeks after that. At the time, I thought he was embarrassed. Now I wondered whether he had been angry because I had blocked something larger. The minister, a gentle man named Reverend Price, looked as distressed as anyone in the room. He apologized to me 3 times. I told him it was not his fault because he had believed my mother. I did not tell him that. When I heard Owen say final instructions, I had felt a fear that had nothing to do with the river. By the time we left, rain had begun again, thin and cold against the church windows. Owen offered to take me home. I said I wanted a shower and a locked door, not a conversation. He followed me into the parking lot anyway. "You're in shock," he warned. "I am, which is why I need you to stop deciding things for me." His jaw tightened. "I was trying to help your family. With documents from a lawyer I don't use. There are payroll obligations, contracts. The company can't just freeze because you're unreachable." That sounded reasonable. Owen had been my COO for 6 years. He knew every route, every plant manager, every recurring payment. He had also once known the exact way I took my coffee and the story of why I refused to wear silver jewelry. We had been engaged for 14 months before I ended it, 11 months before the accident, after Gideon found that Owen had approved a consulting contract for a company owned by his cousin. Owen called it a mistake. The money had been repaid. I had believed the financial explanation long enough to separate work from our personal relationship. I had not believed the apology long enough to marry him. "Payroll can wait until I call Gideon," I told him, "and no one signs anything in my name." For the first time, the concern left his face completely. "Of course," he replied, "whatever you need." My house sat alone at the end of a narrow road outside Newark, an old brick farmhouse I had restored after my father died. June, the woman who found me, had lent me a sweatshirt at the hospital, so I was wearing it under my damp coat when I got home. The house smelled faintly of cedar and the lemon cleaner Rosa always teased me about. I had imagined the familiar rooms would make me feel safe. Instead, the front door was unlocked. Nothing obvious was missing. My laptop sat on the desk. The blue ceramic bowl by the stairs still held my keys, but a drawer in the office was open by an inch. I always closed it. Inside were bank statements, a spare passport, and a small fireproof pouch containing the signed copy of my shareholder agreement. The pouch was gone. I stood there holding the drawer handle while the sound of the chapel returned to me. Owen saying he had my final instructions. Malcolm calling Preston Vale. My mother crying beside an empty urn. Then my phone rang. It was Gideon. "Sloane," he breathed, and unlike Owen, he sounded like he had forgotten how to use language. "Rosa just told me, you're alive." "Apparently. Has anyone tried to change anything at the company?" There was a silence long enough to change the air in the room. "Yes," he admitted. "Owen asked me this morning to release the reserve account to an entity called Holloway Bridge Holdings. He said it was authorized under your continuity plan. I refused because I had never seen the authorization. Then he sent a scanned letter with what looked like your signature." My throat tightened. "Did you release anything?" "No, I called you. Your phone went straight to voicemail. Then the sheriff's office called your mother. I thought a tilde cents a circumflex, not a circumflex euros." "Don't apologize. Forward me the letter. And Gideon, change every company login connected to me. Right now, not tomorrow." He did not ask why. Already doing it. The letter arrived a minute later. It was on my company letterhead. It directed Gideon to transfer $6.8 million from Hart Linen's emergency reserve into Holloway Bridge Holdings, supposedly to protect the business during my incapacity. My name was at the bottom in a clean blue signature. It looked like mine until I saw the date. April 31. There is no April 31. That tiny, impossible date was the first proof I had that somebody had not merely panicked when I disappeared. Somebody had been preparing to use my absence. I called Camille from my kitchen floor because my knees had stopped cooperating. She was in Boston for a conference, but when I told her about the funeral folder, the missing pouch, and the letter, the crisp calm in her voice sharpened. "Do not speak to Owen or your brother alone," she told me. "Do not go through papers in the house without photographing everything first. And Sloane, listen carefully. I updated your estate plan 3 weeks ago. Your original documents are in my office vault. There are no final instructions that give Owen authority over you or the business." "Then what was in that folder?" "I don't know yet, but it wasn't yours." She caught a flight home that night. While I waited, I called the sheriff's office and asked to speak to the deputy assigned to my accident. Deputy Holt explained that tire marks suggested my SUV had been struck from behind before it left the road. He had assumed a hit and run. When I asked whether there was traffic camera footage, he told me the county camera at the intersection had been offline for maintenance. "Your vehicle's onboard system may tell us more," he added. My SUV had been towed to a private lot. The tow operator had already released it to an insurance adjuster at Owen's request. At Owen's request? He identified himself as your emergency contact and business partner. The policy documents listed him. I had listed him years ago, when we were still planning a wedding. That night I slept with every light on and a chair under the front doorknob. I kept telling myself that the accident, the funeral, and the forged transfer might be separate disasters colliding at the worst possible time. It was easier to believe in bad luck than in a conspiracy built by people who knew where I kept my papers. At 2:13 in the morning, an email arrived from an address I did not recognize. The subject line said, "You should not have lived." There was no message, only one attachment, a photograph of my office drawer taken from inside my house. The photo was time-stamped, 6 hours before the crash. Camille arrived at 8 the next morning carrying coffee, 2 legal pads, and the expression of a woman who had already decided someone was going to regret underestimating her. She hugged me gently, mindful of my ribs, then walked straight to the office. "First," she said, "we preserve what we have. Then we find out what they thought they could take." The missing pouch was an easy starting point. It contained my old shareholder agreement, but Camille had the executed copy. Hart Linen Services had begun as a laundry pickup route my father ran with one van. After he died, I used a small life insurance payout and a bank loan to buy industrial machines. 10 years later, we served hospitals, hotels, and senior living facilities across 3 counties. I owned 70%. Owen owned 15%, earned through a performance plan. The remaining 15% was held by an employee trust. The agreement gave me voting control. It also required a board review before any transfer of reserve money above $500,000. "Holloway Bridge didn't need a forged signature alone," Camille said, after reading Gideon's forwarded letter. "It needed a story that you were incapacitated and a way to manufacture corporate authority." Could Owen do that? Not legally, but he could persuade someone to act fast, particularly if they believed you were dead. I did not want to say Malcolm's name. Camille said it for me. "Why was your brother's development lawyer at your memorial service?" I told her about the apartment project. She wrote down Holloway Bridge and Preston Vale, then asked for Malcolm's number. "No," I said. "Not yet. If he is involved, I don't want him warned." By noon, Rosa had brought a box from the office. Inside were printed invoices, route logs, and an old tablet she had found in Owen's locked cabinet after Gideon changed the access code. Rosa set it on my table and looked at me with both fury and relief. "I knew something was wrong when he came in Monday acting like the building belonged to him," she said. "He told everybody you were taking leave and that he would handle announcements. Then he asked which drivers had dash cameras." "Why?" "He said he was reviewing safety policy, but he only asked about the routes near Greystone Road." My accident had happened on Greystone Road. Rosa continued before I could respond. "And last week, he had your car here. Remember when he offered to get the rear sensor fixed? The mechanic from Bellevue called for him." I remembered. The backup sensor had made a chirping sound, nothing dramatic. Owen had told me he knew a shop that could fit me in. I had given him my keys because I was leaving for a supplier meeting. It seemed like the kind of ordinary favor people do for each other. Camille looked at the tablet. "Can you get into it?" Rosa gave a humorless laugh. "Owen uses the same 4-digit code for every device. His birthday. He thinks changing the wallpaper counts as security. The tablet opened to a work email account. Most messages were routine. Then Gideon found a folder labeled continuity. It held drafts of letters, board resolutions, and a blank emergency authorization form. The earliest file was dated 7 weeks before my crash. 7 weeks. Not a panicked plan after I vanished. A plan made while I was still sitting across from Owen at weekly operations meetings, while my mother was asking whether I would come for Sunday dinner, while Malcolm was sending me photographs of his new construction site. There was one email chain with an address belonging to Preston Vale. Owen had written, "If the principal is unavailable and the family confirms presumed death, can the succession instruments be moved quickly?" Vale's reply was careful. He said a court order or valid estate documents would be needed, and that he would not participate in any transfer without them. Then, 3 days later, someone using Malcolm's email had written, "Understood. We will have family consensus and the documents Sloane left with us." I read that line until the words blurred. Family consensus. My mother had spent years telling me family came before everything. She said it when Malcolm borrowed money and missed payments. She said it when Phoebe left college and moved home, exhausted and broke. She said it when I worked Christmas morning because a nursing facility had an emergency linen shortage. Family came before everything, except apparently before my right to remain alive long enough to approve my own decisions. Camille called Caleb Voss, an investigator she knew from a previous insurance case. He met us at my house that afternoon, took photographs of the open drawer, and asked whether anyone other than family had keys. Owen had a key from when we lived together. My mother had one. Malcolm had borrowed one during a kitchen renovation and never returned it. Phoebe did not. "Any reason someone would want you unable to access your accounts?" Caleb asked. I almost laughed. "How much time do you have?" He did not smile. "Start with the strongest reason." So I told him about Holloway Bridge. Gideon had searched public filings that morning. The holding company was created 2 months earlier. Its sole manager was a corporate services company, but the mailing address was a suite above a coffee shop in Columbus, the same address used by a lender called Morrow Capital. Malcolm's apartment project had been financed by Morrow Capital. The first false conclusion came easily. Malcolm was drowning in debt. Owen wanted control of Hart Linen. They made a plan to use a forged continuity authorization if I disappeared. I hated that it made sense. I hated more that I could picture my brother convincing himself it was temporary, that the money would be returned after the development sold, that I would be too overwhelmed to make a fuss. But a plan to steal money was not proof of a plan to kill me. That distinction kept me awake. The next morning, my mother arrived unannounced with a casserole and an apology already arranged on her face. Camille had warned me not to meet with anyone alone, so I let her sit at the kitchen table while Camille worked in the office with the door open. "I should have called you before we planned anything," my mother began. "You thought I was dead. I understand the service. I don't understand the lawyer." Her fingers tightened around her purse. "Malcolm said there were urgent business matters. Owen said he was trying to keep your employees safe. Did you sign anything?" She looked at the casserole instead of me. "Mom." "Only a statement. They said the bank needed confirmation that you would have wanted the company protected." The room seemed to tilt. "What statement?" "I don't know. I was upset. Owen brought it to the house. Malcolm said it was just to prevent layoffs." "Did it say I was dead?" Her lips parted, then closed. That was answer enough. I felt something in me pull away from her, not loudly, not all at once. It was like a thread being drawn out of a sweater. "You signed a statement saying I was dead, before there was a body, before you even spoke to the hospital." "They told me the car was underwater." Her eyes filled. "I believed them." "Who told you?" "Owen called. Malcolm was with him." Camille came out of the office. She had heard every word. My mother stood quickly. "I didn't know about any money," she insisted. "Sloane, I-59 tokens truncated IFI'd me. If their goal had been a clean inheritance, learning that the documents failed gave them a reason to become desperate. I asked Camille whether Owen knew I had changed the will. He attended no meetings, she said, but someone may have seen the calendar entry or heard you mention it. I remembered Owen asking casually why I had met Camille for lunch 3 Fridays in a row. I had told him it was personal. He had smiled and said, "Everything with you is business, Sloane." I was curious. At the time, I thought he was hurt that I would not confide in him. Now I heard it differently. Police searched Owen's apartment on Friday morning. They found nothing dramatic, no weapon, no written confession, no duffel bag of cash. But they did find a second phone in a closet, purchased with cash. Its location history placed it near Bellevue Auto on the day my SUV was serviced and near Greystone Road at 8:49 the morning of the crash. Owen's lawyer claimed his client had been checking a property listing nearby. Then the phone revealed a call at 8:52 to a prepaid number that had contacted Malcolm 24 times in the preceding month. The prepaid number belonged to a man named Curtis Lyle, a mechanic who had been fired from Bellevue Auto after customers complained about missing tools. Curtis had a prior conviction for tampering with a vehicle. He also had an unpaid balance with Morrow Capital. The police brought him in that afternoon. Curtis denied everything for nearly 6 hours. Then Caleb, who had been reviewing the lot camera footage, found an image from the night before the crash. At 10:18 p.m., a pickup truck entered the towing company's adjacent service gate. Curtis was driving. A second vehicle stopped behind him for less than 3 minutes. The plate was blurred by rain, but the vehicle's distinctive damaged left taillight matched Malcolm's SUV. Curtis asked for a lawyer. By then, I believed I knew the ending. Malcolm had hired Curtis to sabotage my car. Owen had coordinated the papers. My mother had been used. The law would take them, and I would spend the rest of my life wondering how a brother could look at me across a dinner table while arranging my absence. Then Phoebe called me from our mother's house, her voice so faint I could barely hear it. "You need to come," she whispered. "I found something in Dad's old cedar chest, and Mom is saying she knew." I drove there with Camille behind me in her car. I did not want to enter that house alone anymore. Our childhood home had always looked smaller when I returned as an adult. The hallway wallpaper was still yellow. The staircase still creaked on the 3rd step. Phoebe was waiting in the den, white-faced, with an old cassette recorder on the coffee table. My mother sat in her chair, both hands wrapped around a glass of water. "Tell her," Phoebe said. My mother looked at me. "I did not know they were going to hurt you." It was not an answer. "What did you know?" She began to cry, quietly this time. "Malcolm came to me in March. He said the project was failing. He said people would lose their jobs, that he had signed things he didn't understand. He said Owen had a solution, but he needed me to cooperate if you were ever incapacitated." "Incapacitated how?" "He said you worked too hard, that you were exhausted, that you might have a breakdown." The words were so absurd, I almost could not process them. "You believed I might have a breakdown." "I believed you had been unhappy," she pleaded. "You stopped coming for dinner. You ended things with Owen. You were always angry." "I was angry because Owen stole from my company, and Malcolm kept asking me to finance a project Gideon told me was unsafe." "I understand that now." "No, you knew enough then. You signed a paper about what would happen if I disappeared." She flinched. "I thought it was insurance. I thought they would use it only if you couldn't manage things." Camille stepped forward. "Did you sign a power of attorney?" My mother nodded. The room went silent except for the cassette recorder's faint motor hum. A power of attorney was not valid after death, and it did not give anyone the right to transfer corporate assets without the required approvals. But it could let someone act while claiming I was alive and incapacitated. That was the missing bridge between the forged bank letter and the proposed estate sale. "Where is it?" Camille asked. "Malcolm took it." Phoebe pushed the recorder toward me. "This is what I found. Dad made it. I think it is why Malcolm was always so scared of Morrow Capital." I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, older than I remembered and somehow nearer. He had recorded a message 6 months before he died, when the company was still one rented building and a fleet of used vans. He spoke about a loan he had taken from a predecessor of Morrow Capital. He said the lender had tried to force him to sign away our house after a late payment. He had paid them off with help from an old friend, but he warned us never to borrow from them. Then he said something none of us had heard before. Malcolm knows about the side agreement because he was with me when I signed it, my father said. He was 17. I told him it was over, but I don't think he believed me. If anyone from Morrow tells him otherwise, he needs to call a lawyer, not try to fix it himself. The recording ended with a click. Phoebe explained that she had found a stack of envelopes under the cassette. One was addressed to Malcolm in my father's handwriting. It had never been opened. Inside was a copy of the loan release and a note. You are not responsible for my mistake. Do not let anyone use fear to make you one. Malcolm had spent 24 years believing A tilde cents a circumflex, not a circumflex euros, or allowing himself to believe A tilde cents a circumflex, not a circumflex euros, that he was tied to an old debt. Morrow Capital had found the fear and built a new debt around it. That did not excuse what he had done, but it explained why he had become so frantic, so easy for Owen and the lender to direct. The bigger truth was not that my brother was secretly evil. It was worse and sadder. He had spent his life being scared, and he had eventually decided his fear mattered more than mine. Camille took the cassette and letter to the police. The note did not prove the crime, but it gave investigators a motive for Malcolm's relationship with Morrow Capital. The loan files they subpoenaed showed that Malcolm had been receiving threatening notices about a personal guarantee. The guarantee was real, but Morrow had inflated the claimed penalties through a web of fees. Holloway Bridge's proposed purchase would have erased Malcolm's liability because Morrow controlled it from both sides. Owen was not merely helping Malcolm. He had negotiated to become Holloway Bridge's operating partner after the acquisition. He would run Hart Linen without me, using the company I had built to service the very development that had put my brother in danger. When police arrested Owen, he was leaving a gym with a duffel bag over his shoulder. He looked almost offended when he saw me standing near the patrol car with Caleb and Camille. You think you know what happened, he called as an officer placed cuffs on him. You don't know Malcolm. I walked closer, stopping where Caleb indicated. Then tell me. Owen gave a small, tired laugh. He begged me to help him. I told him documents weren't enough. You were too careful. You would come back and tear it apart. So you cut my brakes. I never touched your car. It was the first thing he had said that sounded like truth. Police had found Curtis's prints on a tool recovered from a drainage ditch near the auto shop. Curtis had done the cutting, but Owen's phone records, texts, and the forged documents proved he had created the plan around it. You knew I might die, I said. I knew you would survive a scare, he insisted, and the sheer selfishness of it made me feel colder than rage. Curtis was supposed to force you off the road, not send you into the river. Malcolm changed the route. Malcolm pushed for it. I wanted to reject that. Owen had every reason to lie, but it matched the argument Phoebe overheard. This is not what I agreed to. You don't get to grow a conscience now. The man I had almost married had helped arrange terror as a business strategy. And he wanted credit for drawing a line somewhere before murder. I told him, you didn't save me. You just failed to finish what you started. Malcolm turned himself in 2 days later. I saw him once before the hearing, in an interview room at the county jail. Camille told me I had no obligation to go. I went because I wanted the last version of him I remembered A tilde cents a circumflex, not a circumflex euros my brother at 14, teaching me to ride a bike without letting go too soon A tilde cents a circumflex, not a circumflex euros, to have a chance to explain how he became this person. He looked smaller in the orange uniform, not humbled exactly, more like the performance of confidence had finally exhausted him. I'm sorry, he said before I sat down. I did not answer. I didn't tell Curtis to kill you. You told him to make sure I missed my meeting. You sent him to my car. You were near the road. What did you think could happen? His eyes filled. "I thought you'd be hurt, maybe in the hospital, long enough for us to stop the foreclosure and make the sale. Owen said we could put everything back once Morrow was paid." "Put what back? My company, my life?" I was desperate. "So was Dad. He left you proof that you weren't responsible for his debt. You could have called me. You could have called Camille." Malcolm looked down. "You would have said no." "Yes," I replied. "I would have said no to giving Morrow Capital my company, but I would have helped you fight them. I would have helped you sell the land. I would have helped you find a way that didn't involve turning me into an empty chair at a funeral." He began to cry. I wish I could say it made me feel powerful. It made me tired. "Mom signed because of me," he whispered. "Phoebe didn't know. Owen kept saying it was controlled. I believed him because I needed to." "No," I said. "You believed him because the plan let you avoid looking at what you were choosing." That was the closest thing to a confession I ever received from him, and it was enough. Curtis later accepted a plea deal and provided a recorded statement. He said Malcolm paid him to cut the brake line, and Owen paid him to follow my car and ram it if I continued toward the supplier meeting. Curtis claimed he had aimed for a slow side impact, but the road was slick and my vehicle spun farther than he expected. He drove away because he panicked. The prosecutor charged Malcolm and Owen with conspiracy, attempted aggravated assault, forgery, and attempted theft by deception. Curtis faced related charges. Morrow Capital was not charged in the criminal case at first, but the financial investigation widened. Investigators found its principals had used Holloway Bridge and similar companies to acquire distressed businesses through predatory loan arrangements. The state attorney general eventually filed a civil action against them. The legal process was not the clean, swift justice people imagine. It took 14 months. There were continuances, depositions, hearings about emails, arguments over whether Owen's texts showed intent. There were days I left the courthouse convinced that language had been invented to keep pain at a safe distance. Attempted transfer, probable cause, material misrepresentation. None of it captured the white urn beneath my photograph. But facts accumulated. The April 31 letter, the archive on Owen's tablet, my mother's power of attorney, the location records, Curtis's statement, the draft probate filing. The price Holloway Bridge offered for a company worth nearly twice as much. Each piece was small enough for someone to dismiss alone. Together, they described a trap. The most surprising witness was my mother. At first, she wanted to avoid testifying. She said she could not bear to choose between her children. I told her she had already chosen when she signed the power of attorney. This time she had to choose truth. She did, not beautifully, not without tears, but she told the court that Owen and Malcolm came to her before the crash, that they had prepared her to believe I might become unable to run my affairs, and that they persuaded her to sign papers she did not understand. She admitted that, when the sheriff called about the car, Malcolm told her there was no point waiting because Sloane would have wanted us to act. The courtroom did not gasp. Real courtrooms rarely do. The judge simply wrote something down. Still, I felt the story change. My mother was no longer the weeping woman at the funeral, either helpless victim or hidden villain. She was an adult who had made a cowardly choice and finally accepted responsibility for it. Owen took a plea agreement after the judge allowed the tablet messages into evidence. He received a prison sentence, restitution, and a permanent ban from serving as an officer of a company in our state. Malcolm went to trial. His attorney argued that he intended only to delay me, not kill me. The jury believed the evidence showed he knowingly helped create a grave risk to my life. He was convicted on the major counts and sentenced to 8 years. I was in the courtroom when the judge asked whether he had anything to say. Malcolm stood, looked at me once, then looked down. "I spent my whole life thinking my sister had everything because she was stronger than me," he said. "I didn't understand that she was stronger because nobody was coming to rescue her. I wanted someone to rescue me, and I became someone she needed rescuing from." It was not enough. It was honest. I did not visit him after that. The civil case against Morrow Capital resulted in a settlement, fines, and an agreement to forgive the inflated penalties on dozens of loans. Malcolm's apartment land was sold at a loss. I did not buy it. I did not want a single brick of that project attached to my future. The money recovered from Owen and the company he used went back into Hart Linen's reserve, though no amount could return the months I spent looking over my shoulder. For a while, I considered selling the company. The building felt haunted by Owen's office, by every place he had stood while lying to me. Rosa understood without asking. One evening, she found me in the dispatch room, staring at the wall map of our routes. "You know what I see?" she asked. "A lot of routes that need updating. I see 72 people who kept working because you built something worth keeping. Don't let 3 men and a bad lender convince you it was theirs." So I stayed. We made changes. Gideon and I created a board with 2 employee representatives. No single executive could approve large transfers. Every company vehicle received tamper alerts that notified both dispatch and an outside safety vendor. We offered financial counseling through the Employee Assistance Program because I had learned what secrecy and shame could make people do. I hired a new COO, a woman named Priya who asked hard questions and never called them personal. Phoebe moved into a small apartment downtown and began seeing a therapist. At first, I saw her every week, then every other week. We were rebuilding something that had been damaged by years of silence, not by one dramatic betrayal. She never asked me to forgive Malcolm. That was a gift. My relationship with my mother took longer. For months, she called and I let it go to voicemail. When I finally answered, she did not ask me to come to dinner. She said, "I am learning how to listen without trying to make what I hear easier for me." It was the right sentence, but I needed to see whether she could live it. She began volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping older people organize documents before they signed them. She took a class on financial literacy. She returned the key to my house in a small padded envelope with no note inside. I did not give her another one. 1 year after the crash, she asked whether she could visit the company. Not the office, just the loading bay. She wanted to understand what I had worked for. We stood beside the vans while Rosa directed a driver around a pallet. My mother watched the whole operation with tears in her eyes. "I used to think you had this place because you were lucky," she told me. "I wasn't lucky. I see it now. That was not forgiveness. It was a beginning." The funeral home sent me the unused urn after the service was canceled. I did not ask for it. A note from Reverend Price said he was sorry for the painful mistake and hoped I might find a way to transform it. For weeks it sat in a cupboard over the refrigerator, wrapped in brown paper. I could not throw it away, but I could not look at it either. Then, on the 2nd anniversary of the accident, I brought it to the river. Greystone Road had been repaired. The county had added a guardrail near the curve. I parked at the overlook where the river widened below, carrying the urn in both hands. Phoebe came with me, but she waited a few steps back. I opened the lid and found it empty, of course. It had always been empty. I had spent so long thinking that was the point. An empty urn meant they had made room for a version of the world without me. Standing there, I understood something else. It was empty because they had never actually possessed what they wanted. Not my company, not my life, not the right to define what happened to me. I set the urn down beside the guardrail. I did not toss it into the river. I did not need a dramatic gesture. The river had taken enough. Later, I donated it to a local art program that made memorial pieces for families who had lost someone. The instructor told me they could turn metal objects into small planters. A few months after that, she sent me a photograph. The urn had been hammered open and filled with soil. Tiny white flowers spilled over its rim. I kept that picture on my desk. People sometimes ask whether I forgive Malcolm. The truthful answer is that I do not know if forgiveness is a door you walk through once or a road you keep choosing not to travel. I no longer wake up wishing him pain. I hope prison teaches him to live without using fear as permission. But I also do not confuse peace with access. He lost the right to be part of my daily life when he helped plan for it to end. As for Owen, I do not think about him often now. That surprised me. For a long time, I thought betrayal would become the central fact of my life. It is not. The central fact is that I survived, not because I was tougher than everyone else, and not because justice arrived perfectly. I survived because June Prout took a road she rarely used and saw a hand moving in the ditch. I survived because Gideon refused to release money without proof, because Rosa opened a cabinet, because Phoebe stopped protecting a secret, because Camille knew the difference between a legal document and a weapon disguised as one. And because, eventually, I learned that loving people does not require giving them unlimited power over me. That is where I leave this story. Not at the chapel door, not with my mother crying beside an urn, and not in the courtroom. I leave it at my desk on an ordinary Tuesday, with vans moving outside, white flowers in a photograph, and a life that belongs to me in ways I once thought were selfish to insist on. If you were in my place, what would have been the first clue that made you stop trusting the people closest to you? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please like, share, and subscribe to Wounds and Wonder. There will be another story waiting for you soon, a tilde sense a circumflex, not a circumflex euros. One more reminder that even the deepest wounds can make room for wonder.